Hello, 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 everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. Shortly, I'll hand you over to Phil Goldberg, our moderator for today and board member of the ASI, where he will introduce Steve Hassan, who is our speaker for today. We have Stephen for an hour and 15 minutes. Please stay with us for the full 90 minutes because we will continue our discussion. Even though Stephen has to go to a prior arrangement. And so over to you, Phil.
Very good. Hi, everybody. I hope your winter and your new year is going well. We're very pleased to have discovered Stephen Hassan and his work last year. And I had him on my podcast. He had me on his. And we thought he would be a perfect presenter for ASI. Let me read a bit from his bio. Steve is a widely recognized expert on cults, mind control, and undue influence. All topics, of course, that are, sad to say, relevant to contemporary spirituality and the work we're doing at ASI. He's the author of several books, including Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, and Releasing the Bonds, some of which you can see strategically placed behind his left shoulder. And he's the founder of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center, which provides resources to help people break free from undue influence. And he's created models for understanding cults and their dynamics, which is one of the contributions we wanted him to speak about today. The BITE model, which is an acronym, and the influence continuum. So Steve, thank you very much for volunteering to be with us, and happy you were able to take the time. We're going to turn it over to Steve now, and please everybody, keep muted when he's ready to take questions. Use the virtual hand raise in the reactions button, and then we'll call on people in order. Okay? Thanks. Steve, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Philip. Pleasure to get to know you a bit. And when I learned about the Association for Spiritual Integrity, I was very excited and very much want to encourage more consciousness around consumer awareness, consumer education, as well as for those of us who've been ensnared in authoritarian groups and had traumatic experiences, to have a place to talk about these important issues. Am I going to be on speaker view? And then when I'm sharing my screen, because I'm seeing everybody, is that just on my end?
I think so. I think
Oh,
you
okay.
can
I just
change it.
changed it. Okay.
Okay.
Got it. So I'm going to go through a bunch of slides quickly so we have more time to do interactions. And I need to leave after 75 minutes. But hopefully we'll whet people's appetite and interest in my work, in my books, and my website. So thank you again for the invitation. I have two websites, Freedom of Mind, which is the primary one, and a nonprofit called freedomfromundueinfluence.org, which is the result of my professor who supervised my research for my doctorate. So I'm under his nonprofit status to do further research because I did my doctorate on wanting to change the law to create a framework for the legal system to evaluate undue influence, and I can explain what I did about that. My first slide, I always like to ask people, how would you know if you are under mind control? And I'm not going to take a long time and ask for people to chime in because of this presentation. But I can tell you that when I was a Moonie, which happened for me in February of 1974, when I was an upper junior at Queens College, studying creative writing, mostly I was writing poetry. My girlfriend had abruptly dumped me. 3 women were on campus, met me at the cafeteria, flirted with me, lied to me, and said they were students, which they weren't. I asked if they were part of some religious group. They said, oh, not at all. And within a few weeks, I was believing Sun Myung Moon was the perfect master, sinless Adam, that Jesus came to him and told him to finish his mission. And being of conservative Jewish background, this was so not anything I was interested in or oriented to. And that's what I'll get into momentarily, is the fact that destructive cults do deceptive recruitment intentionally. And before I switch slides, this is a slide of a mass wedding where all of these people have identical wedding dresses and suits. They are all pretty much strangers, but members of the group. And before this ceremony where they were married by Moon, and he has the Guinness World Book record of 30,000 couples at one time, he lined up the men and the women, and he'd go, you and you, you and you, you and you. And you had 5 minutes to decide if you accepted the Messiah, the sinless man's recommendation, which almost everyone did. Moon died in 2012. This is one of his sons who lives in Pennsylvania, who created a cult called the Rod of Iron Ministries.org. Should be with TRIES. They changed the name since I made this slide. But he wears a crown of bullets, and he says we have to worship the AR-15. And so he was also at January 6th saying that it was Antifa, and the Moonies newspaper, Washington Times, was doing disinformation. I recently learned, by the way, that my former cult has been at the Center for Climate Science Denial for 50 years, the Washington Times Foundation. I read a book by David Lipsky on climate change denial. So moving along from my personals, I should say I got deprogrammed 2 years later after a near fatal van crash. I was a true believer. I was a fanatic. I was a leader. I was totally indoctrinated, but I was in this accident from sleep exhaustion. Woke up as I was driving into the back of a tractor trailer truck at 80 miles an hour, and was in the hospital for weeks away from the cult. And this was way before cell phones. And it led to me calling my sister, led to a voluntary deprogramming, because I was so sure I wasn't brainwashed and I wasn't in a cult. I thought everyone else was brainwashed and was in a cult except me. But I woke up and I came to understand, with the help of information about Chinese communist brainwashing by Robert J. Lifton in his 1961 book. He outlined 8 criteria of how you could tell if a group was brainwashing you, and that led to my exit. Again, I'm going to go quickly because I'd like to do interactions and answer questions. The next slide, I just want people to understand, because a lot of destructive cults say there's no such thing as brainwashing. It's not a scientific, a valid concept. And yet, in the American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Statistical Manual, this is the latest version, number 5, but there was a 4 and a 3 that literally talked about cults and brainwashing as a disruption of identity. So I just wanted to mark that for our listeners. So the idea here is that if you think about my experience, there was Stephen Hassan of Flushing, Queens, New York, who wrote poetry, liked girls, played basketball, and wanted to be a college professor. I met the group and a pseudo self was created. I was told that my real self was satanic, that I needed to model myself after the sinless master, Sun Myung Moon, that I should be a small Sun Myung Moon and walk like him and talk like him and think like him and feel like him. So this new cult identity kept the real me suppressed. So that's a critical understanding of a dissociative disorder created by mind control cults, is this dual identity. And so a critical concept is that your real self is not erased, it's just suppressed. And that's how people who even born in cults, wake up and leave. It's like your authentic self, your higher self knows there's something wrong, knows that you're being exploited, you're being sexually violated, you're being abused, that the leader is saying one thing publicly and you're experiencing incongruent behavior directly. And so this dissonance is what helps people to walk out. I wanted to include this slide, and not all destructive cult groups have a top leader who's alive. Often there are figureheads, but this is a general understanding for most of these organizations, and that depending on where you are in the hierarchy, you're going to have different access to information and experiences. And especially most people are what I call fringe members, where they believe, but they don't live in an ashram or live in a center isolated from the outside world. I also want to say, since the invention of the smartphone, most cults are recruiting online, and most people are not living in communes. They have cell phones, and they're on it 8 to 15 hours a day, and they're constantly being indoctrinated. So what I want to, next few slides are about my influence continuum, and what I want to just outline is the notion that we are surrounded by influence from the moment we're born, but all influence is not bad influence or unhealthy influence. So to have a framework to compare real love versus conditional love. I'll love you if you stay in the group, or I'll love you if you're obedient. That this is not real love. This is conditional love, that real friends are your friends no matter what. But if you're in a mind control group and you're told this person is evil, you have to cut off contact, you cut off contact. Moving along. So with the influence continuum, and I have a slide that has the next 3 slides on one, but I just want to pull out for individuals. I talk about the real self, the higher self, the authentic self versus the pseudo identity that's in the image of the cult leader and the ideology. As I mentioned, unconditional love is based on your beingness versus they will love you if you do what you're told and you stay in line. Where there's real respect for conscience versus being told that you have to follow the dogma or the doctrine and you should ignore your conscience. And I remember when I was first told to lie when I was recruiting, my conscience really bothered me. And I was just indoctrinated to believe this was Satan trying to steer me away. And my conscience got rewired until I got out. In your real self, creativity, humor. In the cult, I was told to demonstrate my faith and my commitment to God. They asked me to throw out all my poetry as a demonstration of my solemnity, which I did, never to get it back. And in healthy free will, critical thinking, reality testing versus don't think, just do. Just whatever you're told is what needs to happen. This next slide really just talks about some features of leadership. Healthy leaders are psychologically healthy. Many of them have been in therapy. They've done self-exploration. They've examined their shadow, their dark side. They know their own limits. They trust other people, and they're trustworthy and accountable. And destructive cult leaders are very narcissistic and psychopathological. And I like to use Erich Fromm's definition of malignant narcissism as the stereotypical profile of cult leaders. And I have a list, by the way, on my website, freedomofmind.com, of all of the criteria of narcissism plus the psychopathic thinking you're above the law, pathological lying, sadistic, paranoid, etc. And by the way, these the slides of the influence continuum, etc., is all on my website for free. But you want to stay away from these people, you know, but you also don't want to stay away from healthy leaders. And a lot of people who exit authoritarian cults are afraid to trust any leader. And that's just, trust is one of the big things that I work with my clients to help them heal. And then with organizations, you really want organizations that have checks and balances, that give informed consent, that recognize people are different, and that encourage you to grow, and that if you want to leave, they're like, good luck, stay in touch, versus the unethical types of organizations that say we know everything, we're special, we're elites, with an authoritarian structure, that are deceptive, make people over in their image. They do a lot of things that they say the ends justify the means. And they say pretty much there's no legitimate reason to leave. If you leave the group, you're weak, you're stupid, you have bad karma, it's your fault, versus the leader is problematic or the structure of the group is problematic, etc. So this is on my website. It has all three of the last slides all in one, but I think it's very useful and helpful to just have as a frame in your mind as you're experiencing things, to be able to identify if there are red flags of, a dangerous person, and make it conscious and be able to sort that out. And what I did my doctoral dissertation on is what I called the BITE model of authoritarian control. That stands for behavior control, information control, thought, and emotional control. And the more these four things combine to create a pseudo identity, the worse the group is. So on the extreme end are terrorist groups and pimps and traffickers, in my experience, dictatorships. I'm going to move on. Again, you can go on Freedom of Mind and download this for free. And I'm going to go into the BITE model next, a few things. It's an acronym for behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. I'm going to go very quickly through this, so you don't try to write it all down. Just go to my website and download it, and you can see the whole list. There's literally, I don't know if I have a handout handy, but there's a lot of variables for each of these that you can get on one downloadable document. But things like regulating your physical reality, dictating who you live with, who you identify with, who you can have sex with or no sex at all, regulating clothing and hairstyles, diet, definitely manipulation and deprivation of sleep. I did a lot of fasting in the Moonies. I did several 7-day fasts on just water. Financial exploitation, dependency, restriction of leisure and entertainment and vacation time. And I tell people now, if you're working every single week of the year for a corporation and you're not going away for vacation 2 weeks at least a year, you're in a trafficking situation that's really not healthy. Major time spent on group indoctrination and rituals where you need to ask permission. An example I like to use is a healthy group versus an unhealthy group. You're a devoted member and you hear that your mother is ill in the hospital asking to see you. A healthy group says, take as much time as you need, go see your mom. The unhealthy group says, leave the dead to bury the dead, or, they're not your true family. And don't waste your time, or you're too important where you are here. And it's just so unhealthy. Going on, because again, I'd like to have maximum time for interaction with folks on behavior control. They really don't want you to be an individual. They really want you to follow the rules and regulations. Disobedience is punished in a variety of different ways. The more extreme groups are physical punishment. I know for me, having sex was evil. You couldn't be alone with a woman, or you couldn't hug a woman or kiss a woman. And I had uh, two nocturnal emissions as a 19 and 20 and 21-year-old, and I was punished that these were evil spirits that were invading me, and I had to take cold showers for 7 minutes till I turned blue because I had allowed Satan to invade me. A lot of these groups do corporal punishment. In some of the extreme groups, people are told to kill their parents, like some of the terrorist groups, kill your parent or we'll kill you. And they make child soldiers out of these folks. So we did behavior control again quickly, information control, like destructive cults lie. Like they lie withholding vital information, distorting information, or just outright lies. So that's a really important thing. And when I'm working with someone who comes out of a cult, I often ask them to remember when they were first approached. What did they think they were getting involved with? And how honest was their recruiter? And you start seeing the patterns of destructive cults are really, really clear. And another big variable is if you want to control someone's mind, control their information. So in particular, don't let them have access to critics or former members. Keep them so busy, they're not sleeping. I was sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, 7 days a week. Of course, there were no cell phones back then, but no access to any newspapers or TV shows or whatever. And if there was a story about the Moonies, they would typically take a line out of the whole article and attack that one line and ignore the rest. But members would believe they learned what was in the article, which they didn't. Unhealthy groups have insider doctrines and outsider doctrines. You're often encouraged to spy or report others if they're violating anything. A lot of propaganda, typically in the bigger cults. Any information you reveal about your past is used to manipulate you, especially if you start wanting to leave or you start challenging the leader because you're watching abuse. Information is used. And in some cases, people are made to believe they had false and actually have false memories of their childhood or believe that their parents raped them, etc. And I myself believe that I had a terrible childhood and that my father was abusive. And my father, as it turned out, slapped my face once when I was 13 when I lied to him. And as my sister said, Daddy, he would never hit us. What are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, but he slapped my face. He's like, give me another example. You mean he lost his temper once in your entire childhood? I'm like, I guess so. I don't really remember anything else. Then we'll move on to thought control. So, healthy thinking, you're growing, you're learning, you realize how little you know, you're curious, you have wonder. When you're in a mind control group, you're taught you have the truth with a capital T, and your life gets very narrow. Things are very black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them. Some of the groups will change your name and identity. There's a criteria that I learned from Chinese communist brainwashing called loaded language, where you start reducing complex relationships and people into thought terminating cliches or buzzwords. And the more you can control somebody's language system, the more you can control their ability to think. And one of the most sophisticated cults with this is Scientology, that has their own dictionary of terms. And Hubbard said, if you ever get confused or if you come across something you don't agree with, it's because you passed a word you don't really understand. You need to look it up. They call it study tech. And when people come out of Scientology, undoing the words and like learning the actual language, whether it's English or German or whatever, is part of the critical part of healing, in my experience. And what else? Thought stopping is a technique that I was trained to do and other cult members to do to get rid of doubts, to chant, to pray, to meditate, to speak in tongues if you have a doubt, to get rid of the bad thought. And often hypnotic techniques are used. That's an area I've spent 40 years learning about, which I can talk further. I mentioned thought stopping already, and memories can be manipulated, false memories created, rejection of any rational analysis or critical thinking, and you just learn not to ask critical questions of the leader, doctrine, or policy. Otherwise, you're going to get punished or outed in one way or another. And then emotional control. So really, people are made to feel special and chosen and made to feel super high, how lucky they are that they found the master. But very quickly after you commit, things start narrowing down more and more so that you really have a lot of guilt manipulation, fear manipulation. If you're feeling homesick, you're told to block that. Or if you're angry because you're witnessing something that's bad or wrong, you're taught those feelings are not to be trusted. And you always made to feel like it's something wrong with you instead of the leader, the doctrine, or the group. So I mentioned guilt, identity guilt, your past is problematic, historical guilt, social guilt, And they want to elicit that information from you. So if you did something in your past you're ashamed of, they will continually bring it up and use it against you. A very important thing is fear manipulation, fear of yourself, fear of thinking independently, fear of the outside world, enemies are coming after you, losing your salvation, burning in hell, um, being reborn as a cockroach for 10,000 years. Um, and people in mind control cults experience highs and lows where you feel like you're special and it's wonderful one moment, and then you're, a terrible sinner the next moment. And probably the universal of mind control is what I call phobia indoctrination, which is the programming of irrational fears in a person's mind. And in my case, I was taken to see the Exorcist movie in 1974 when it came out. They rented a whole theater in Greenwich Village, and then we were brought up in vans to hear Sun Myung Moon speak. And he said, God made The Exorcist. This movie is a prophecy of what will happen if you leave the Unification Church. And I can honestly say at that moment that he said that, I started just totally being afraid of my own thoughts and did the thought stopping and the chanting, and because I was so petrified at what I saw in the movie. And remember, I come from a Jewish background. We don't believe in evil spirits or Satan or anything. Like we're going to hell. Like just not part of my mindset and my belief system. This is my dissertation is online, and I decided I would put a lot of search terms in the title of my dissertation regarding undue influence, thought reform, brainwashing, mind control. And what I used is trafficking, which is an international illegal thing, labor trafficking and sex trafficking, which is defined as fraud, force, or coercion. I used that as the framework. Then I took all the major models from Chinese communist brainwashing, did a quantitative study on my BITE model, and then added law professor Alan Shefflin's social influence model that looks at an influencee and their vulnerability and the influencer and how that influencer exploited and abused. So I put it all in one package. It's 165 pages. So for anyone who's an attorney, I believe you had Carol Murchison speak to you previously. She loved this and is using this in her work to help represent victims. Quick slide on some of my books. Yes, I believe the Trump is a malignant narcissist. I compared him with Jim Jones, Hubbard, and Moon in chapter 3. And what I learned when I was researching the book is that there are many authoritarian cults supporting Trump and believing in Trump. And if you want to take a slide, this is my QR code from my Linktree, but you can find my Linktree on Freedom of Mind. And with that, I will stop sharing and make myself available for questions and answers.
Thank you, Steve. That was a great overview. We can now entertain questions.
Great.
I'll look for, there's one, Mahadevi Jaya. You may unmute.
Hola. First, I want to say thank you for such an informative and deeply powerfully profound sharing in this circle. So thank you for the safety here. I want to ask, so I have actually had this personal experience, and all of which you're speaking of, I've walked through. And as I was healing myself out of it, I still wasn't really aware of what it was. And so as I've walked through my healing journey, these type things have come into my awareness. And so with my heart, I just tune in, and then my awareness expands and I'm able to detach a little bit more. But I also am aware that there's healing underneath that. So I felt very called to somehow speak or mm, share the healed side of myself so that people around me, or I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but so that other people can have some type of maybe a little sign before they may make the choice. But I don't really know how to do that. And so maybe I'm talking so that myself will show myself what that means. Um, but I've tuned into a few of these on Association for Spiritual Integrity, and they keep kind of snowballing what I've walked through. And so it raises my curiosity as to why am I really here, other than to gather this information and to know that people are actively using their lives to um, further awareness because they care and they actually are loved. So maybe I'm just ending this with gratitude after saying all that. So
So
thank you.
if I may, thank you so much. And I'll just say more and more former members are finding their voice and are outing their former group and finding other people who had left their group. So there are podcasts, there are private Facebook groups, there are some documentaries that are coming out. So um, a very famous former member who has a pretty good podcast that I like is Sarah Edmondson and her husband Nippy. They were in the Nexium cult, which was renowned because women were getting branded near their genitals, and the leader was sentenced to 120 years in jail for trafficking. The podcast they have is called A Little Bit Culty. And I should mention, because I didn't, that I have a podcast called The Influence Continuum. That was the graphic, because I try to do some positive influence things as well as the undue influence. And then lastly, another thing that just realized I didn't talk about is a TEDx talk that I recorded. I think the title is something like "How Can I Know If I've Been Brainwashed?" And it's a four-part reality testing strategy that I recommend people do if they want to answer the question whether they have been brainwashed or mind controlled. And I'll just say quickly, Philip, the first step is disconnect from what you're into, like take a time out, like go away, like turn off the phone, go to the woods, like reconnect, sleep, eat, listen to music you used to love to listen to, etc. So the first one is like stop the constant bombardment that is typical when you're in a high demand group. Second one is learn models of authoritarian control. So I talk about Lifton's 8 criteria. My bite model is just two of several that are out there. Then I say seek out critics and former members intentionally. Because if you are in a brainwashing mind control group, you've been poisoned not to trust any ex-members or critics, but take the position of, hey, I'm an intelligent person. Let me listen to what they have to say or look at the evidence they've come up with, and I can evaluate it for myself and then honestly reflect in terms of the bite model, for example, and what the former members or critics have to say. Honestly reflect and then go back in time to your first exposure to the group and ask, if I knew then what I know now, would I have ever said yes? Would I have never gotten involved in the first place? And if the answer is no, then you know it's time to leave and that it's not a healthy environment. So I have on my website on the media page links to my 4 TEDx's. That's the most recent one that people can avail themselves of if they're interested.
I want to
Thanks,
jump in
Steve.
there. Sorry, Phil. I know that there's several hands up. I want to, I suppose, thank you, Steve, for that. And I want to just address Mahadevi Jaya. I just want to thank you for your vulnerability, and that you rose to something very brave and courageous here by saying, you know, that your experience is being witnessed here. And I think that's what I heard, is that you're presenting yourself here in an open and honest and vulnerable way, and recognizing that healing is happening underneath. And I just want to say, I think you're extremely brave for saying what you did. And there are so many of us that have your back, because moving out of a cult control, such as what Stephen is telling us about, it takes several steps. It takes several years. I think, Steve, it took you years as well to heal and to evolve as a human being again, with your own autonomy intact again. And so sometimes in that healing modality, the healing mode, we're not sure that we're doing what we're doing, because we've got to follow this internal sense of what is wholesome and let that guide you on. And that's what I'm hearing from what you said, Mahadeva, is that there's a wholesomeness guiding you towards taking these steps and speaking as you did just now. And I think that's really important, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I haven't used my voice until I felt I was in that place, because I am not here to cause anything other than love and light and healing on this planet. So thank you.
Thank you all. I'll go in order that the hands were raised. Next seems to be Rick.
Hi, Steve. I just want to make a couple quick comments and then perhaps have you respond or elaborate. Firstly, it seems like the word cult is not necessarily a pejorative term. You could say that Jesus had a cult going, and he was telling people to leave their families and give up their money and, all kinds of things like that. And then I like the fact that you describe a continuum rather than a black and white, it's a cult or it's not a cult. There are degrees of cult. And some of them might actually be kind of healthy. I mean, I was playing pickleball for a few years. And if you're into that, it's a bit of a cult. People are like so enthusiastic about it, and recruiting friends and so on. And also, it seems to me that cult, from my own experience and observations, that cult indoctrination is subtle and incremental, so that it's like the frog in the slowly heating water metaphor. You don't know that you're in it, and as the water heats, you don't really notice a change, and you can get quite far deeply into cult mentality without recognizing any moment at which it had happened, or even without recognizing that it has happened. And then, as you know, and you probably experience in your consulting work, it's also incremental on the way out. No one's going to snap out of it overnight. It takes a long time to decondition. And I appreciate that you wrote that book about Trump, because it seems that about half the country is in a rather dangerous cult right now. Anyway, those are my comments.
Yeah, so thank you. And you're so right. And after a talk, I'm like, I should have said this and I should have said that and whatever. But I talk about, I'm in the cult of scuba diving. I'm written up in a book called The Cult of Mac, because I've only used Apple products since 1982. I also didn't mention, but I'm part of a renewal progressive Jewish congregation in Brookline, Massachusetts for 25 years. So I meditate, I pray, I daven, I study Torah, and I hang out with my friends. But we don't think we're better than other congregations. There's no pressure to give money or guilt-tripping people. In fact, my rabbi that I credit for bringing me back to Judaism, wrote the big book of Jewish humor, and he loves to tell jokes, even on the holiest nights, presumed holiest night of the year, Kol Nidre, he would crack dirty jokes. And I'm like, this is a guy I can learn from. And I'll just add, he was part of a trip to see the Dalai Lama, who wanted to understand how Jews had survived in exile for as long. And my rabbi went along with Zalman Schachter Shalomi and several other people to meet the Dalai Lama. So yes, and then I also want to say, yes, it's incremental for sure, although I snapped out of it, and I've met many people who were like at a tipping point. So it was subtle over a long time, especially if you're born in a group. But for some people, they have like a light goes on, and they're like, I don't want to be here anymore, you know, and exit stage left.
But even if you snap out of it, don't you find that there are a lot of ingrained assumptions and that you have to untangle over time?
1,000%. There's recovery, and that's why, I mean, to plug my first book, Combating, which came out in 1988, and I updated it. I've got the rights back, and I updated it. But I mean, people would read the book thinking, I want to learn about the Moonies, and they'd be like, wait a minute, this is Jehovah's Witnesses, or this is the Mormons, or this is any number of other groups. And just reading the book is like, oh, this is what this thing is about.
Thank you. Next in line seems to be Joseph Adams. Unmute and
Yeah, thank you. So I've got two questions. The first one, looking back at the diagram with the fringe members and the rank and file, and you mentioned how like now that we got cell phones and stuff, that things might be a little different with having to be, being on like, the property versus being in your home. So the first question is just like, in the age of social media and stuff, like what could you say about, how like what would it look like for someone to be on their phone hooked up to one of these cults? And then the second question is, the psychedelic renaissance is happening right now. So do you have anything that you could say about the risks of the use of psychedelics for in these kinds of contexts? Those are my two questions.
Great questions. And I really invite you to come to my website and tool around, especially my blogs with interviews. So I started researching online radicalization formally in 2015 when ISIS was recruiting a lot of people. And I really know a lot now about the whole online world. And if you're not aware of a podcast called Your Undivided Attention, I would encourage you to check that out. The people who created it are part of an entity called the Center for Humane Technology, former Google ethicists. Then they did the Social Dilemma documentary, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that. And the bottom line is that we don't have any privacy for our personal data, and it's being collected without our permission, and it's in the dark web. And there are now over 5,000 data points for every voting American that can be bought by bad actors, including Russia and China. And AI is being used to radicalize people to the left extreme and the right extreme. And to find, I mean, there's a whole psychological warfare thing I get into in the Cult of Trump book, but it's very much what's happening in real time. And there's no regulation of social media platforms. And lastly, I'll say that there's a Stanford University persuasive lab. The fellow who created it, his name is BJ Fogg, Fogg. he's the one who taught Google and Facebook and all the social media platforms how to get humans addicted to dopamine hits by likes, by dings, but with algorithms. So there's a whole, and then there's another important book called Surveillance Capitalism, where on your phone, unless you turn off the microphone and stuff, it's listening to you. And if you are not aware, you talk with friends and then all of a sudden you're getting an ad for what you just talked about. It's because they're listening to us. So I don't want to spend a long time on it, but humans are not meant to be digital citizens, and our minds are not created to be online. And we need to really regulate and see this as a tool and not be controlled by it. In fact, my first TEDx is technology controlling our minds. That was my first TEDx talk. And then you asked about psychedelics and such. So I've done some very interesting interviews on the topic. I interviewed Rachel Harris, who is a PhD who did a lot of scholarly research on psychedelics. I recently interviewed Peter Grinspoon, who's an MD who wrote a book on cannabis. His father wrote the first book on marijuana in 1971. Marijuana Reconsidered. And I recently posted an interview with a colleague from Melbourne, Australia, who is involved with training mental health professionals in the use of MDMA and psilocybin and such to use for therapy. And I think they can be incredible tools to help with therapy, but there is so much abuse of psychedelics and by cult leaders to make people more suggestible and vulnerable so they can be programmed. So again, I mean, the notion is anything that has the power to help has the power to be abused and exploited. So my big message is it's our mind, it's our body. We need to have an internal locus of control for what we decide to do. And I tell you that sleeping 7 to 9 hours is the single most important thing that people need to do to protect their minds. And don't like turn off your phone hours before you go to sleep. Like, listen to music, take a warm bath, listen, do something else than be on your cell phone. So forgive me if I went on too long, Philip.
We forgive you, Steve.
Thank you.
Next up is Jason Jones.
Wow. I was really impressed by your talk, and certainly your doctoral dissertation is a whole lot better than mine and a lot more useful. But don't you think that most religions have an aspect of mind control? I've been in various different religions, mostly because my patients and everything, I would go and if they told me they were a particular religious belief, I'd go and actually go to the group and see what it was about so I could better serve them. And I saw a variety of different things. And certainly I was in Soka Gakkai for a while, and I enjoyed the people, but I certainly didn't enjoy the leader, who's extremely narcissistic. And speaking of doctorates, he has the Guinness Book of World Records for the most doctorates accumulated, which he, of course, buys in their honorary doctorates. It's quite disgusting. But going back to my question, don't you think that most religions are cultic? And in fact, this is a group that are spiritual advisors and a variety of different things to the public. And I've certainly seen therapists that actually get a cult around themselves, and it's very destructive, but very profitable. So do you think that in some ways both religion and therapy can be cultic?
Yes, 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 yes. So again, the model I use is Yes, cults exist. I mean, culture exists in any group. And when you're part of a group, you have to give up certain individual rights in order to conform with the rituals and the rules of the group. But the critical things for me are things like, honoring your authentic self, you utilizing your conscience, your critical thinking faculties. And I do have blogs on therapist abuse, coach abuse, anywhere where there can be an imbalance of power. And I have helped people get out of Soka Gakkai. And in fact, there's a story in combating of someone who is in SGI. Akeda passed away recently, the living Buddha. This is a group, by the way, if you're not aware of it, is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho, and Tina Turner was in that. And you could chant for a Porsche. Like, think about Buddha rolling over in his grave, hearing somebody teaching, you can get a Porsche, you can get a wife, just chant for it and it'll magically appear. So anywhere there's power, it can be abused. And again, my message is our authentic selves. I truly believe in this idea of a soul or an authentic self or a higher self, because I work with people born into the most abusive, horrific cults, but they still know there's something wrong. And when they have a chance to escape, they do.
Thanks, Steve. Next up, Michael Spade.
Hello, thank you. I was a religious studies major and I had to take one semester on cults in the founding of America. And boy, was that an eye-opener, mind-boggling. But I have two questions, well, maybe one statement / question. My wife and I lived in Utah for 12 years, and the amount of abuse and suffering that I saw at the hands of the Mormon Church just blew my mind. I had no idea. Number one in the nation at the time I was there, consumption of pornography. Number three for child endangerment. Top 10 for unwed mothers. The list just goes on. So if you would like to make any comments about the Mormon Church as a cult or cultishness or however you want to say that, I'd be interested in learning that. And
Sure.
let me echo what you said about high tech and your phone. I made my living in the computer industry for over 30 years, and I can tell you nothing's not tracked, stored, kept. Don't put anything on your phone that you don't want on the 6 o'clock news with your grandmother watching it. It is, everything is tracked. So thank you very much for this talk. It's been tremendous. And I already ordered 2 of your books.
Oh, awesome. So let me know what you think. I also didn't mention, but I've created an online course for clinicians with APA CE credits, but also you can have a version without CE credits for less money, but it has a much more in-depth presentation. It's 9 hours instead of 35 minutes of what I did today. So I want to say that when I first wrote Combating in 1988, I had no idea the Jehovah's Witnesses were as huge and as horrible as they are, or the Mormons as huge or horrible. And my entry into the Mormon world was first with FLDS, the Fundamentalist Latter-day Saint polygamous cults. I am embarrassed to say, but Dr. Phil's show contacted me because there were 2 15-year-old girls who had run away, who didn't want to be married to 60-year-old guys, and they wanted me to counsel them for free, which I agreed to do. So I did a deep dive learning about this particular cult. And then it came out and it resulted in the attorney generals of Utah and Arizona going after Warren Jeffs and eventually putting him in jail. But right after the Dr. Phil show aired, I get a call from the Ex-Mormon Foundation saying, we'd like to invite you to Salt Lake City and speak to our group of 250 former Mormons. And many of us are former fourth, fifth, and sixth generation Mormons. To which I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, we want to hear about your bite model. So I went out in 2000 and I'm giving this presentation and everyone's head is going like this. So I'm going through the bite model and I started understanding it. And then more recently, John Dehlin, who's a psychologist who was excommunicated by the Mormons because he spoke out for gay rights, asked me to be on his Mormon Stories podcast. And I said, would you read Combating First? And then he writes me, your book's blowing my mind. And the next thing is he has a color-coded bite model for the Mormons. And I'm like, whoa, thank you, John. So then this year, 2023, I went out in March to Utah and taught a workshop with John for 8 hours for 150 ex-Mormons. And that course is up on my website. So for those who want to know more about this horrific cult, homophobic, patriarchal, corporal punishment, they were doing conversion attempts for gay, just high suicide rate, just and very political, as you know, about Utah.
Rebecca, you're up.
Hi, Stephen. It's nice to see you. We've been connected on Facebook, but I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and my brother has been at their headquarters for like 40 years. I experienced all the shunning and the CSA and all of that. And so then I found that even the communities that are created outside of organizations, so say like the ex-Jehovah's Witness or ex-Mormon, there can be a feeling of cultiness within that as well. Like I went into Buddhism, I thought it'd be different. And then I found myself in a similar situation. And now I'm basically like everywhere I look, when there's a group of people that there's any religion involved, I feel like everything's a cult. So how do you get, and because I was a person that was like raised in it, I know I'm more susceptible to that. Whereas like you were saying, you know, were older when you were introduced and you had a different background. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And your questions are so spot on and important. So when you're raised in a group, and the JWs teach 2-year-olds about Armageddon and show them frightening phobias about that. Women are second class. There's corporal punishment. If you're a little kid and you're playing in the back of the Kingdom Hall, you'll be hit with a belt or slapped or spanked. So corporal punishment is terrible. So my work with folks who are raised in groups, they need to understand what's normal. Like if I wasn't raised in this authoritarian family or cult, what would like a family, how are parents supposed to behave? You know, and what I say is healthy parenting recognizes every child is unique, and the parent's job is to help steward their unique child to become their true self in fruition versus a clone of the parent and in the image of the cult. And so healthy parenting is developmentally appropriate. There's no physical violence or threats. It's verbal instruction and modeling, encouraging exploration and inculcating, if anything, a love of learning instead of trying to be perfect or get good grades or be competitive. And what I want to say about people who are in a mind control group, unless they do the homework and really reset their mind to where they realize their embodied minds and the locus of control should be within them, and have the framework for evaluating and understand how to rewire the triggers, there's a very high propensity to being attracted to other mind control cults. Because I believe unconsciously you're going for healing and you're going for what's familiar versus, the uncertainty of something that you're not familiar with. So there's a huge number of people who do what we call cult hopping, but their time in each one gets shorter and shorter because they start seeing the patterns. But the value of like reading a comprehensive text like Combating is I tell stories of different types of cults, and I try to explain the bigger patterns for how people can, discern and protect themselves and navigate. And I say if something is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny, and use your voice to challenge authority. Tell me how you're not like the Moonies. You're saying you're perfect. Tell me how how can I know that you're trustworthy? And the healthy people, if they're challenged, will cop to their, yep, I need therapy, or yep, I am addicted to shopping, or I am addicted to fame. For those of you who've heard of the Kabbalah Center, Berg, their faces were all over it. And for Jewish mysticism, ego is the last thing that Jewish mysticism is about. But when people are like, I am the greatest Kabbalist in the world, and you need to, pay me, and I can advise you on your company, it's like, run.
Andrea?
Hello. Yes, I just want to say thank you so much for your work. I've been listening to this talk and I'm just laughing because I tick the box on everything that you've said. Like, I was raised Mormon. I've been in a Korean cult. I've been in another cult that I just got out of maybe 2 years ago. And when I got out, like, thank goodness, something inside of me, that thing you talk about that knows what's right, and like this beautiful, I think it's my soul also, it helped me get out. And it was really difficult to get out, and like you say with Mormons, to know what's normal. Like, I had no background for what was actually normal and how I should be treated, and so I just kept going in. But anyway, fast forward a couple of years, I've done so much psychological and heart healing, and I've truly found that place in myself that does know where to go, how to navigate my own self. So I'm not needing to look outside for the leader anymore. Like, I'm truly doing my own life. And I'm a hypnotherapist, and I'm creating a model to help people discern what's good and what's not. And like your spectrum, healthy to unhealthy, I think is the thing that really stands out to me. Because if it's all culture, it's all health, or it's all on there, the healthy version is what I want to point to. So anyway,
this is a whole nother topic, but congratulations. Go to my website, put Mormon in, and start listening to the interview with John.
That's exactly what
and other people. But I also want to say that when I first got out of the Moonies, I was immersing myself in the literature on social psychology, social influence, brainwashing, persuasion, and there was a missing element, and I didn't know what it was. And in 1980, a social worker friend of mine said, I'm going to a hypnosis workshop, next weekend, want to come? And it was Richard Bandler, one of the co-founders of NLP, which I had never heard of. And I went to this, and I'm pacing up and down the back of the room because I had never been to a workshop since getting out of the Moonies. And I was like really afraid. but I'm pacing back and forth, listening to what he's doing up front. And I'm going, that's what they did to us. And that's what I was doing as a leader. And so I became immersed in NLP for 2 years. I even moved to Santa Cruz to be an apprentice to John Grinder. But I then realized this is an amoral system, and that they're using it to teach anybody how to manipulate, exploit, confuse, and program people. And I was like, like getting into another cult. So I got away from that. And then I was like, well, this was created based on the work of Milton Erickson, who is a psychiatrist. I want to learn from the Erickson Foundation. And they said, you need a master's if you want us to teach you. And that was part of my motivation to get my counseling master's in 1985 initially. But I've been learning and teaching, and I have video workshops that I've taught to the International Society of Hypnosis, etc., on how cult leaders are using hypnosis. And then lastly, I just want to caution you about using hypnosis for therapy with people without having a deeper understanding of this, because there really are where people are unintentionally encouraging false memories and other bad things. I'll also say that guided visualizations are hypnotic suggestions. They are that. And again, if you're an ethical person, you're in a yoga class and you want to feel the warmth of the mat and feel your body melting into the sand, great. But if you are a member of 3HO, Yogi Bhajan's cult, with the used to be the white turbans, that was a horrendous cult. And I've interviewed a number of former members and leaders of that group too.
Oh.
I've only got a few more minutes, so I will talk shorter. But maybe, Philip, we can try to catch
Okay, we have
anyone
a
who
few more
hasn't
hands
spoken.
up.
Yep.
Shanti.
Hi, thank you. I have sort of complicated issues. I'm in the middle of Integral Yoga. I have left mostly Integral Yoga, which I consider somewhat of a benign cult. But the community, so all the cults that have been mentioned today are pretty much on the far end of the spectrum, it seems to me. And I think more people are familiar with or involved in, as I had been, with sort of middle of the road, where there's a powerful spiritual figure, there is brainwashing, there's control of all kinds of things, but there's not some of the more horrific things that are part of your sort of diagram. So my two issues, one is my experience with Swami Satchidananda and Integral Yoga for decades was watching an organization become a cult. I only can see that in retrospect, but I mean, it did not begin as a cult. And I would honestly say it's more cult-like even after his passing 25 years ago than it was. It clearly was when he was still alive, but it's become even more so, sort of more cemented in. So one of my things is, what's your sort of awareness or take on how organizations become cults? The other thing is, how does one address a larger group of people who are now facing sort of sexual abuse, truth-telling about Swami Satchidananda in this particular organization? There are hundreds and hundreds of people that believe the truth stories from many women, including myself, but also are grateful, still have a certain amount of love for the teacher, and are grateful for the benefits in their life. I'll leave it at that.
We could do an hour on what you just said easily, and all I can say is, yeah, most of the groups are not as extreme as the extreme examples, and I think that it depends. If you're already decided, I don't want to be in the group anymore, then the question is, what do I need to learn from the experience? And I do validate that some groups don't start as authoritarian and they become extreme authoritarian. Very few authoritarian ones become benign. I can count them on one hand, maybe, in 47 years of doing this work. What else did you comment on about that? Sexual abuse and truth-telling. Do people know the Guru Papers, Diana Alstad and Joel Kramer's book? Great book. Highly recommend it. They wrote a sequel to Passionate Mind Revisited. I recommend that book also. I don't have all the answers, by the way. I'm still learning and growing, and so I'm open to suggestions too. I come from a place of having helped myself with the help of therapists to unpack all of the horrible stuff in my cult, and then doing therapy and learning what works and what doesn't work. And over the decades, I've changed and I've grown. And if you want my most current view, look at my interview with Nigel Denning in Melbourne, Australia, who also shares Daniel P. Brown as a teacher. Daniel was my forensic psychologist teacher, but also I did level 1 Tibetan Buddhist training with him that he calls his approach pointing out way, and it's very hypnotic. And for me, I didn't want to do level 2 and 3 because he said that I can't have any other teachers at the same time, and that was my exit. And secondly, I'm not into calling deities into my body. Like, that doesn't resonate with my spirituality, and that's what the higher levels of Tibetan Buddhists were about. We're bringing in these masters into your body, and I was like, I'm out. But I respected him, and the Dalai Lama asked him to translate all the secret meditations, and he did it. He passed away from cancer.
Steve,
But check out Nigel Denning.
Steve, I'm conscious of you having to leave at 15:15. It's now 18 past.
Appreciate it. I really want to hear from Connie, though. Can we do Connie, and then
Yeah, sure.
that'll wrap it up? And forgive me, Rick, for not doing a second one.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Steve. We didn't get to talk earlier, Steve. Two little threads I wanted to pick up. One was you mentioned the unconscious. And, you know, when I interviewed many people for Meeting the Shadow on the Spiritual Path, what I really was able to uncover was what you were describing as these patterns, these unconscious patterns that draw people to charismatic teachers and belief systems and authoritarian cultures that are really rooted in early unmet childhood needs. You can tell my orientation as a psychologist. And if we begin to uncover these really early needs that we're typically not aware of, the need to be seen, the need to be loved, the need to belong, the need to be special. Many teachers use these to control people and gain obedience. And
1000%.
yeah. So what I call cultivating shadow awareness is in part about cultivating an awareness of our own blind spots. And then the shadows in these teachers, where's the risk for their becoming abusive? Like you mentioned, narcissism and psychopaths in your slideshow. This is epidemic now. But if we learn how to identify it, like what you just said, he wouldn't let me see other teachers, boom, red flag, gone. So if we learn to identify these things, we can be really empowered. And the other point I wanted to make was what do we do with our longing for authentic spiritual awakening that gets completely covered up in cult-like groups? It's the longing often that brings us there, whatever we call it, the longing for transcendence, for God, for something larger than ourselves. If we're little kids or we're born into it, that's not the case. But if we're drawn as adults by that yearning for something greater, and then we experience religious trauma or spiritual abuse, where do we take that longing? And I think that's a really key question.
Yep. So I need to go, but I will say that part of Daniel Brown's teaching was he developed an attachment repair. And very simply, he would use hypnotherapy, to bring people back to early traumatic memories. And trauma isn't just like something bad happening to you, but it's also neglect, things that weren't attended to that really should have been. And Dan would say to the person, I want you to imagine the ideal mother and the ideal father uniquely suited to your personality. And I want you to imagine what they would have said and done at that traumatic moment. He wouldn't say trauma in trance, but he'd say at that moment. And people would immediately start to identify the healing repair experience. And so the idea is how to help people learn how to create healthy mothers and fathers in our own heads that are giving us encouragement, that are giving us safety and security and all of that. That said, people with secure attachment still can get deceived into mind control relationships. It's not 100%, but in terms of the longing, that's the critical healing piece I do with my clients. And what else did I want to say? There was one other piece that I wanted to add about. So I don't know, but I belong to a Jewish temple. I like being part of a spiritual community. I like praying together. I like chanting together and meditating together and studying Torah together. And it works for me. And we do social justice, and it's progressive and gay friendly. So what do we do with our longing? Find a community that isn't, where the balance is pro support and not, pro abuse and manipulation and exploitation. With that, I've got to jump off. I thank you for this opportunity. And, I wish this organization much success. I just started a private Facebook discussion group. If people are interested in hearing more, it's not public, but you can go to freedomofmind.com and email us or whatever. And yes, social media sucks. The man who studied it, but
Says
I'm
the man
also
with a
using it.
Facebook page.
But I'm using it because I want to have more reach than just talking one-on-one in my office. So it is a mixed bag. So anyway, thank you again, Philip.
Steve. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
We
Bye.
appreciate it.
Thank
We'll
you.
be in touch.
Great. Take care. Bye-bye.
I wanted to say something in response to Shanti's statement. In my research, almost all the groups started by gurus and Buddhist monks and people like that have that pattern you described is very similar. They start off very informal and easy, and they get more cultish as time goes on. And I think a lot of it, I'm sure sociologists would be able to explain, have it as partly a function of size and success, and the need to control grows when you have 10,000 people following you as opposed to 10 people in a living room. But the other factor that's important to understand is almost all those groups also have levels of involvement. Sort of inner core is more culty than the people who go to a yoga class led by an integral yoga teacher. You can participate in levels that are non-cultish. But when you get into the sort of inner core, into the nucleus of these groups, it becomes more and more culty. And the last thing I want to say is, Steve said the examples of groups that start off authoritarian and become more democratic are few, but one of the best models is what happened to Kripalu after the Amrit Desai, the founding guru, was exposed as a sexual exploiter. They evolved into an educational nonprofit, and so there are examples. So anyway.
Also, the LA Zen Center, another example.
Very good. Were there other points of discussion? We only have a few minutes left. And Jack, if you want to have any messages about ASI before we leave.
In 7 weeks' time, oh gosh, I should have it prepared, but I didn't think about it. There is another, as you know, we have a webinar with a speaker, and then the next one is the community speaking itself. And so we have an interesting one coming up. I think it's 7 weeks from now. Yes, the 26th of February. If you can save the date, and please be on our mailing list. We only tell you about what's coming up. There's nothing else going on except, hey, this is what we're doing and this is the next event. So please come to the next one, because yes, it's another heated topic. More coming soon.
Okay. Any other comments before we tie it up?
I probably even shouldn't mention this now because it's not a really good wrap-up point. But if I had time, I was going to ask Steve about, you know, when a whole nation is overtaken by cult mentality, like Nazi Germany, for instance, and then what ended up happening, and now how immune, to a great extent, German society is to the kind of thing that happened under Hitler. At least I think that's the case. I mean, it's illegal to deny the Holocaust, and people are just horrified about what happened and so on. And I do think that something like that is going on in America today. And as you know, there's great polarity and division. And I'm wondering what it's going to take for a nation or half a nation to get deprogrammed.
Well, we can repudiate the cultishness in the next election.
We can. Hopefully,
I was
we will.
going to ask Steve if it's possible for anti-cult groups to become cults.
Probably so.
I
We'll
think
have to
the
take
word
that into
cult-like, Phil, I think
Yeah.
there's a spectrum from really
Absolutely.
rigid cults to cult-like, which is groupthink and,
Yeah.
you know, but not maybe explicitly abusive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Taylor Swift is a cult, but you know, it's not
Yeah.
probably hurting anybody.
Yeah, and you know, some of us were involved in groups that were very cultish, but we could walk away and we could be irreverent, and you know, we could do a lot of things
Well, when I left, I lost all my friends, Phil. No one
well,
except
that happened.
you, except
I
you.
did. Well, I didn't.
Yeah.
And me.
Yes, and Rick. There you go. Anybody else?
I would just like to say that if you feel drawn and you have the resources, please make a donation to the ASI just so that we can continue this work. We pay a small stipend to each speaker, but our running costs are a continuous thing that we're constantly trying to make ends meet there. So if you feel drawn, then please support us. We really appreciate it.
And if you donate, you'll get enlightened faster.
As ASI becomes a cult, right?
Thea,
If
hand up
if
there.
it's a large donation, we'll send you a lock of Phil's hair.
Is there opportunity for dialogue between now and February 26th? I am new in discovering the ASI. I am feeling as I listen to Shanti, and I'm listening to Connie, and I'm listening to all of you and thinking, these are the conversations I want to be part of right now. Are there options between now and the 26th to keep exploring these topics?
We record almost all of these unless it's something very sensitive that we can't record because of respecting vulnerability. And so we post them on YouTube, as this one will be posted on YouTube. So it's worth kind of checking out our YouTube channel and diving into other such topics. We have a Facebook page or group. I'm not a Facebooker myself, so I don't know the difference. But on our website, you will see resources and there'll be a link to the Facebook group there. So there's conversations on the Facebook group. But you know, we're a small organization with a lot of volunteers who really believe in what we're doing. So it's about each of us participating to make this work. But they're the channels we have open right now, Thea.
Thank everybody for being with us and for being part of ASI. We appreciate it very much. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.